92% of AI users say generative AI boosts their productivity, but the number one barrier to adoption is communication, not technology. It's wild that we built tools that can write anything at lightning speed, and somehow our communication seems to be getting worse. Founders are outsourcing their voice to ChatGPT. Pitch decks all sound the same. We're all getting emails with that weird ChatGPT twang to them. Nobody knows what anyone actually believes anymore. And here's the kicker. Raising money is storytelling. It's not just the data. It's not just slides that analyze your total available market or outline all the features and functions in your product. It's about storytelling. You're trying to predict the future and then make it so. Or said another way, you need to get investors and employees to believe in a future that doesn't yet exist. And in a world flooded with AI-generated everything, a human voice, a real one, cuts through louder than ever. I'm Tom Chavez, and today I'm speaking with someone who knows this craft at the highest possible level, Terry Szuplat, former Obama White House speechwriter and author of Say It Well, winner of Porchlight's Best Marketing and Communications Book of 2024. Terry spent 8 years helping a president inspire people, calm crises, and move nations with words. Today, he's going to help us understand how storytelling builds trust, wins investors, rallies teams, and serves as one of the last defensible moats in the age of AI. Terry, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me on, and I love that introduction. I feel like you took the words out of my mouth.
Well, we got a lot to get into here, Terry, because I really believe every word of what I said, and I think there's so much opportunity for you coming from your particular background to help people in tech, founders especially, sort of get to the core of their pitch. So pitching is storytelling. I certainly subscribe. What you're saying is that pitching to raise money is basically an exercise in storytelling. So I wanted to get your view on how highly technical founders can resist the urge to cling to the data and adapt successfully to this mindset, right? Because a lot of founders spend a lot of time studying math and computer science and coding and solving things. You're rewarded in classrooms for having the answer, right?
Right.
You don't have to worry about these storytelling bits. How do you help people shift their mindset and become successful at this?
Right. And I think it is exactly that. It's a mindset shift. So much of our lives, particularly in academia and when we're in school, we're told, provide evidence, provide data. That's the way to make your case. And, to a point, once you're out in the workplace, once you're out in the world, we have to remember that there's a limit to what stats and numbers and facts and figures can do. And I talk about this in the book. There was actually a really fascinating study that was done a number of years ago. I think it was at the University of Pennsylvania, where there was a food crisis going on, I think in Africa. And the study participants were given real money to donate to a real organization that was doing real work. And so this was a real test of different approaches. And one pitch was all about stats. It was all about the numbers, how many people were impacted, how big the problem was. Another pitch was a much more story-based pitch, one where you told one story of one kid and the difference your donation can make. Well, which one do you think raised more money? Well, of course, it was the one with the story.
Yep.
Because it touched people's hearts. It moved them. And actually, what was fascinating, the reason, and that's not particularly revelatory. I think we all know that is the power of stories. But in this particular study, there was a third group, and they did something that we used to do back at the White House, which is they sort of combined the statistics with the story, right? Because you don't want to be just about one person. You want to remind them that there's a bigger problem at play here. And what did they find? The donations actually went down. So, and the fascinating thing there is, I actually reached out to the professor who conducted this study and said, well, what is going on here? Because I intellectually, this doesn't make sense to me. And she said something so obvious that we all forget, which is, you can't have a human connection with statistics. That's not what moves people. And that's just one study of many over the years that have shown that the more you load up something with numbers and statistics, the more likely you are to actually lose your audience. So you're out there, pitching for a company, an advocacy group, an NGO. You've really got to be a great storyteller. Great leaders, great fundraisers are great storytellers. We see that over and over again across so many sectors. I always tell people, go watch those St. Jude commercials that we see all the time.
Right.
I actually went
Right.
down to St. Jude once to learn how they do their work, and they have a remarkable story to tell about all sorts of data, clinical studies, life expectancy, but that's not what they show us on those incredibly
Exactly.
powerful commercials. They show us the story of one
Right.
kid. It moves us, and so it's just if you're drawn to facts and you have a tendency to rely too much on data, well, then let's look at the data and remember that stories are actually more powerful than data.
Yeah. Well, in the age of AI, and I mentioned this at the beginning, and I'll come clean. I'm using it, I'm using all of the LLMs, right? These answer engines are exciting. We live in wondrous times. It's very powerful. The problem is that as we rely on them, I worry that people aren't remember if are having the opportunity to even learn how to think in an organized way
Mm-hmm.
and how to persuade in a non-machine generated fashion. I'll illustrate with an example. One of our companies, it's an early formation, and we're taking stock of the competitive landscape. All of the competitors are saying all of the things, and they all sound exactly the same. And again, they have that ChatGPT like twang to them, right? So in addition to having a good story, it strikes me that there's this authenticity problem too, or somehow you need to kind of punch through and not sound like all the other AI slop that's out there. So beyond a good story, how do we get that right?
Well, this has always been a problem and a challenge in communications. Uh, when people come to me, when they come to speechwriters like me, they often say, "Well, what should I say?" And one of our sort of initial responses that we say often, it's very common in the speechwriting world, so you should say what only you should say, right? And so
Mhm.
AI is just exacerbating a problem that has been around
Right,
forever, which is everyone tends to sound like everybody else, and they
right,
default to the same deck, the same pitch, the same presentation that everybody else has done. Put yourself in the position of the audience. Maybe you're the fourth person on a panel to speak. Do you really want to be repeating what's been said three times before you? No. Imagine you're the third or fourth speaker at a conference, and you're watching everyone else say what you were already going to say. Well, that's a great sign that you weren't saying anything particularly unique. And now along comes AI, and everybody's using it, so it's no surprise that everyone's starting to sound the same. So I think it's more important than ever to remember that fundamental principle that when you get up as a person, whatever your organization, whatever your mission, particularly when you're fundraising, when you're looking for investments, you've got to stand out. You cannot be simply relying on the same tools and techniques and messaging that everybody else is. So you've got to say what only you can say. That word is key. Only. What can you say
right.
that nobody else can say? I've worked with companies at times, and we go through this exercise, and they say, "Well, here's the problem, Terry. There isn't anything we can say that anyone else can say," which isn't really a communications or a marketing problem. That's a mission problem, right? You haven't found your niche. You haven't found your competitive advantage. So I'm always encouraging people to, try to answer that very simple sentence. We are the only company that what? If you cannot answer that, you do not have a compelling pitch. You're not going to stand out.
It's such an easy habit of mind, and you make that point in a really adroit way in the book. What is the thing that you and you alone can say, right? That requires getting personal, right? And taking a little risk, which is also kind of misery making for most technical founders. Like, oh my God, really? You want me to say, you want me to tell my
Yeah,
personal
yeah.
story? What does that have to do with the software,
It's scary,
right?
and you're asking people to be vulnerable, but again, I mean, no offense to all the great tools and technologies that are out there, but you just said you use them all, and we're seeing
Yeah.
various tech leaders just in the last few weeks saying, well, they're kind of all this fun, a lot of them are very similar. So why should they choose you? Why should your potential partner, customer, client, investor choose you? Well, on some level, there's only so much you can say about the differentiating qualities of different products. But what is truly different is you and the story that you bring. And I think we see this over and over again throughout history that the great business leaders, the great entrepreneurs, the great startups, they realize that they're not just there to sell a product or sell a service. They're selling a set of values and they're selling themselves. And if two products, if a potential investor or a customer or client can go kind of either way and they're having trouble deciding, it's going to be the founder, the CEO, their story, their passion for their company, for their service that might tip the scale in your favor. So I know it's I work I've talked to a lot of corporate speechwriters who said, my CEO, they don't want to say anything about themselves. It's too scary. They don't want to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
They don't want to get
Yeah.
personal. And I said, well, how are the speeches? How are the presentations? They're like, oh, they're terrible. They're boring. They kind of just, they sound like everybody else. So again,
Yeah.
that's another way. I'm not telling people to like divulge what you say to your therapist or what you, but there are, the whys of why you do your, why do you do this work? How did you come to it? So often founders are trying to solve for other people problems that they've already encountered in their own life, right? It's a problem that they experience. Tell that story. That's a powerful story.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you, you got me flashing back to a time, probably, I don't know, 10 plus years ago, where I was asked to speak to a group of entrepreneurs coming up in a sort of a structured class at Stanford. And they insisted that I not talk about entrepreneurship, which is my macaroni and cheese. I feel very comfortable talking about that. But they wanted me to talk about my personal story. And it was actually a struggle in the preparation for this thing because I said, well, I'll talk about this. And I show them some slides. I said, no, 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 we don't want to hear about that. So I said, okay, shit, I'll go out there and I'll tell this personal story. But honestly, who cares was my feeling. Like, well, what's the bit, doesn't seem
Right.
useful.
That's what a lot of
I mean,
people say. I hear this over,
right,
well, number one, it's I don't really have anything to say about me. I'm just like everybody else, very humble. So that's appealing. That's nice. And that's a nice quality. And then they'll say, well, what does it have to do with anything? Well, what it has to do with everything. Because again,
right,
you are a human being speaking to other human beings. And we know, again, you have to connect with each other as fellow human beings, and that means stories, that means opening up, that means being vulnerable. We've seen it over and over again, all sorts, politicians who are too robotic and don't open up, business leaders who are too robotic and sterile and don't open up, their audiences can't connect with them. So it's not an act of hubris and being arrogant. You're doing it because it's one of the most powerful ways you can connect with your audience.
well, exactly. And so it was shocking to me when I got up there and I decided, screw it, I'll take a shot. Let's just go for broke. And I got to tell you, Terry, it was really astounding to me how much people needed to hear it. I remember telling the organizer afterwards, like, that was actually weird, because afterwards people are coming up and high fiving and telling me how important it was to hear this. And that was one of my moments where I learned, like, wow, this is not a nice to have. This is pretty fundamental, actually, if we're going to succeed in building, well, in these times, especially if we're going to have any success in not just building successful technology companies, but regaining our footing politically and renewing the vow to democracy. Like, stories, you gotta go to the stories and the facts and the stats, like you said. Yeah, it's not one to the exclusion of the other,
Right, right.
but
We're not saying
just
no numbers, no data ever. Obviously, if you're trying to
right,
get investors, you're trying to show that your product works, your service works, you've got to show some metrics. But I think the mistake that so many presenters make, particularly in tech, particularly in business, is that they think that's all anybody wants to hear. And so it's 100% numbers and data, and there's no stories, and they don't understand why people don't remember what they said. Again, this is about forging a connection between human beings. And it can't be just numbers and data alone. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be the stories of you, of your company, of your people, of your customers. There's so many different ways to do it.
yeah. Well, I want to come back to something we touched on there for a minute around sort of the broader. It's not just about building technology companies, but especially in these times, we see how the technology barons are making their presence felt in DC and other places. So you were in Obama's administration. We've all seen this very confusing, hard pivot among tech leaders to the new administration, which, look, I've been around Silicon Valley for a long while. We were notoriously progressive, right? There was no, in fact, we were probably with some, it was valid for tech to be critiqued as knee jerk in a particular way. But oh my goodness, how the pendulum has swung. Terry, I wanted to kind of get your view. Like, what explains the shift? What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, the shift to me and I'm speaking to you from Arlington, Virginia, just outside of DC. And so,
Really?
I think what you're seeing in the tech sector is similar to what you've seen with a number of law firms around the country, a number of universities. People
Mm.
are scared, and people see the fact that there is an administration that is not afraid to use the levers and powers that it has to go after individuals and individual organizations. And again, we see that across all sorts of sectors. And so we've seen law firms, we've seen universities, we've seen various tech companies approach it in different ways. But I think the fundamental thing that they all share is there's fear. And they're trying to do right by their organizations in the sense that I think, they're trying to keep their organizations out of the crosshairs. They don't want someone doing a social media post about them or their company. They don't want to have that PR nightmare. They don't want to wake up to that. And we've already seen a number of companies go through that. So I think, it's whether you're big or small, left or right, no one wants to be in the crosshairs. And so it's a use and abuse of government power, the likes of which we haven't seen before. And so I think everyone is trying to do their best. They're trying to keep their companies stable. They're trying to take care of their employees. And they're trying to, not stick their head up and get targeted. And I say that, not to judge or not judge anyone for the choices they're making. But you asked the question, what do you think is going on here? I think that's what's going on. I think it's very,
Right.
I think whether you're running a university, running a law firm, running a company, folks are scared.
Many years ago, I had an investor. This is when I was a puppy in my first company. And I remember talking to this investor, and he wasn't saying it in an overweening, arrogant way, but I remember him saying, "Yeah, look, I'm post-economic now." And I remember I'm 28 and I think, post-economic. What does that mean exactly? And then well, that sounds pretty good, right? Post-economic, or the street version of post-economic is fuck you money, right? And what's been fascinating for me, Terry, to watch all of these things have progressed in the last, many, many months, like what is the point of the fuck you money if not to actually
Mm-hmm.
say F you, I'm not doing it, right? The bending of the knee. Yeah, you're right. They're afraid, but it's hard to see the origins of that fear, right? Especially from people who could otherwise just say, nah, I'll stay home. I'm not going to do that. But anyway, those are the times we live in. Hey, I want to switch gears. In your book, you told a great story that I remember vividly about Stanley McChrystal. So he was a special ops general in the Obama administration. And I so vividly remember that crazy Rolling Stone interview he did, where he went off and was taking all kinds of pot shots on Obama and Biden and other members of the administration. So in the book, it's really interesting how you describe how Obama asked you to write two speeches, one accepting his resignation, the other keeping him, and how seeing the words on the page and the logic and the flow of the argument or the speech helped him decide which course to take. So I was wondering if you could just unpack that a little bit and give us some of your philosophy as to why writing it down
Right.
is so important. By the way, I subscribe, but I think so many people just want to wing it.
Right.
They don't want to write it down, right? Why does it matter?
Two most dangerous words in communication, or three.
Yeah.
Four. I'm gonna wing it. It rarely works out. It really works out. And on that particular one, I wasn't the lead speechwriter. It was one of my colleagues. President asked one of my colleagues to write two different versions of the speech as he was thinking through what he was trying to decide. He had to decide whether to, accept the resignation or keep him on after what had happened. And I include that in the book because I think it's a powerful example of one of the many reasons why we should write things down, is that it helps us see the strengths and weaknesses of our arguments. It's really easy to kind of, to BS and brainstorm and to be around a room and everyone's just talking. But once you have to put the words down, once you have to actually make your argument and then see your argument, all of a sudden, you see and your team starts to see, well, that's actually not a very compelling argument. Maybe you brought all sorts of passion to the meeting and wowed people with your passion, but looking at it on the page, it suddenly doesn't seem a very compelling argument. And so, to me, I wasn't part of that particular process with the president, but I remember myself personally being a bit on the fence and not quite sure, you know, not that it was my call to make, but like I wasn't quite sure what to think about that situation and what I would have done if I were the president. But the moment I saw those two drafts and read them, I realized, oh well, he has to go. This is not good for civil military relations. This is not good for civilian control of the military. In the middle of a war, you can't have a general speaking like this about the commander in chief and his team. It just wasn't tenable. But it was only when I saw that, and so both drafts apparently went up to the president, and I'm sure there was one of many factors in his decision. But yeah, I think that's a great lesson for all of us. That writing down our decisions, writing down, presentations, speeches, whatever you want to call them, keynotes. They don't just send important signals to external audiences. They're the marching orders for your team. And so a lot of the speeches that a president gives, and certainly with President Obama as well, they weren't just speeches to the American people. They were speeches to the 2 million military and civilian employees of the federal government who needed to carry out those policies and that agenda. And they needed to know clearly what he believed and what direction they wanted him to go in. So yeah, I'm a massive proponent of writing it out. Don't wing it. We've seen over and over again in politics and business, when you wing it, you're just asking for trouble. But that means you got to make the time to actually sit down and think it through and work with your comms team and actually write these things down. It's really important.
I could not agree more. Look, my little journey is one where early on, there were folks who very zealously wanted to write down everything I was supposed to say, and then I was just supposed to deliver it. And I'd see those videos. I hope somebody's burned them or deleted them wherever they are, because they just sound so wooden, right? But writing it down and then distilling it into sort of, for me anyway, 5 key things, right, that I have in my head, such that I'm not reading from a script. And if you are reading from a script, that's great too. But just frequently, like in my job and under the banner of authenticity, you can't recite a speech, right? You have to just converse with people. But doing your 100 push-ups and having perfect precision and clarity, right, on the key things you want to say with your thoughts organized in advance. Yeah, I can't agree more.
Well, something you just said kind of triggered a thought. You talk about reciting a speech, and there's a whole big debate about whether or not I see this all the time. I'm like, you should never read a speech. You never just read a script. And I think that's a little bit too soon. I think the way you said it is correct. You shouldn't recite speeches. And so specific people say also, should I try to remember my presentation, my keynote? And I generally suggest no, because most people don't have a photographic memory. If you do, if you're one of those rare people who has a photographic memory, go for it. If you can memorize a 40-minute presentation and you're better for it, go for it. Most of us can't. I can't do that. And when you try to memorize, then you're putting all your energies into the wrong thing, because then the moment you miss one word or miss one sentence, you're completely thrown off. So presidents read speeches all the time. Great leaders read speeches. Some of the greatest speeches and presentations we've all heard of all time were written down. So the question isn't about whether it has to be authentic. It has to be good. I mean, you can have a script and read it, and it can be awful content with bad body language and bad delivery. And it's a terrible speech, and it doesn't matter whether you read it or don't read it word for word. So I think you're right. Don't try to recite the speech, but write it down. And that's also, if you don't write it down, how do you practice consistently? You've got to have something to work off of. And then the more you practice, the more you read it out loud, the better you will be in that moment when you actually deliver it.
So one of my investors used to have a CEO day where CEOs from their portfolio would come together. There was structured work and interesting speakers. But one of the things that they did that was, I thought, pretty clever was to have an elevator speech competition. So in our jobs, your elevator speech is the super short thing that you can say between floors 4 and 18, right? to describe or evoke what the company is and why we care. I'm wondering, because Obama was obviously one of the most talented communicators in an awful long time in the Oval, what are techniques that you use to make complex ideas simple, emotional, memorable? How do we get that right?
Well, I have to say one thing is don't believe what you see online. I see all these posts and all these things that say, there's 12 key elements of a great presentation. There's 14 key elements, and I'm always thinking, what are these 12 elements? What are these 14 elements? I've been doing this for 30 years. No one ever told me what these 14 elements are. And then you scroll down and it says something. You think, oh, you've got to subscribe to my newsletter to find out what they are. It's actually not that complicated. And there's something, we would often meet with the president up in the Oval Office a week or two before a big speech, not every single one, but before a big one. And I wasn't on his 2008 campaign. I joined the White House. I joined his speechwriting team after he became president. So I joined a few months in, and then I was there for most of the 8 years. But in some of those early meetings, I remember being there, and he would say things like, or our chief speechwriter would say to us, hey, he'd give us his guidance. He'd walk through everything he wanted to see. And then he'd say something to the effect of, go make sure it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm thinking, what a weird thing to say. I've been doing this for more than a decade. I'd never thought of public speaking or presentations that way. And so I would nod as if I knew what he was talking about because I don't want to look foolish. And I'd sort of go back and I'm thinking, what is he talking about? Of course, like how you start speaking, you keep speaking, you stop speaking, beginning, middle, end. I mean, what he was getting at was, and I think it was important to remember, before he ever became a politician, an elected official, he was a writer. He was an author. He had a real deep appreciation for narrative arc. And he knew that a great presentation, a great story, just like a great presentation or a great speech, just like any great story, great play, great movie, great book, has a clear beginning, middle, and end. Going back to Aristotle for over 2,000 years ago, you set up a problem, you solve the problem, you show what the future and the world can be like with your problem fixed. And it's really pretty simple. And, as a team, we wrote over 3,000 speeches for the president during those 8 years. And if you go back and you look at them, just about every single one in one way or another, no matter where he was in the world, what he was talking about, breaks down in one way or another into this 3-part framework: beginning, problem, middle, solution, and, vision of the future of change and result. And I think that's, you're putting together an elevator pitch. You only have maybe a minute or two, but maybe you only have seconds to talk to somebody. I always encourage people, make sure you hit those 3 points. What's the clear problem you're trying to solve? What's your solution for it? And how is, their life, their world different, better because of it? How can they do their job faster, better, cheaper, whatever, because of what you're offering? That's all you need to do. Especially when you've only got a little bit of time to do it.
I want to ask a follow-up there because one of the other things I sure appreciate on YouTube, these compilations of Obama's funniest moments. Those correspondent dinners were awesome, right?
Right.
Now, it strikes me that, he really was joyful and fun and good with the jokes. And I think, getting people laughing or at least smiling a little bit, a little humor goes a long way, notably absent in these current Republican administrations. They're so serious. Everything, like, nobody can swing a cat anymore. Nobody can tell a joke because they're going to go crazy if you do. I'm wondering, how important do you think a little levity, a little humor can be? And when should you try to inject it? When should you just not, if you don't have that gift, maybe you should just stay home. But what advice do you have for people there?
Right. Well, I think you hit one of the things that people approach you with and say, oh, I'm giving this speech. I need a joke. Give me a joke. I need an opening joke, which is actually the wrong way to think about it. Because no, you don't need a quote unquote joke. You're not a stand-up comedian. You're not a late night host. What you said was the way to think about it. Humor, and humor is different than a joke, right? There's all sorts of different ways you can bring some lightness, some levity to humor to a situation. But that's not a joke. That's not a setup and a delivery. And so I think, you mentioned the correspondence dinners that Obama did so well. He had a great sense of comedic timing. In a way, those almost sort of mislead people about what it is, what humor is, and what the rest of us should be doing. Those were moments where he very much was almost in the role of a stand-up comic, right? They were, set up, delivery, laugh, set up, delivery. It was punchy. That was the formula. But in those was very unique situations, and most of us are not in those unique situations. So
Yeah.
most of the time in those 3,000 other speeches, it was just a little piece of levity, a little piece of lightness that we would bring, get people smiling. And so I teach speech writing at American University here in Washington, D.C. And I'm always getting my students say, just a little something to put the audience at ease, a little something, and it's some sort of shared connection that you have. It's not a joke. It could be something about, you have to work, kind of think about the organization, but something about your own life, something about their experience. The interesting thing is we do this all the time when we have conversations, right, with colleagues and friends and family. Most of us don't speak with family and friends and colleagues in this severe tone where we don't have any humor or levity. So we just have to bring that same authenticity, that part of ourselves that we already have, to our presentations. And again, it's not tell me a joke.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, listen, Terry, I want to switch gears now to our lightning round where I'm going to ask you a few quick hitting questions
Sure.
and ideas. Don't overthink it. Just
Okay.
emote, just react. All right.
Just
You
wing
ready?
it. Right. This can
Just
only
wing
just
it.
wing it, and this
Exactly.
can only
Right.
be bad.
But
It's
fun.
gonna be a
So,
disaster. No, here we go. That is
no,
good.
it's going to
There
be
we go.
great. Here we go. So, what's one myth about storytelling every founder in tech needs to forget?
Oh, it's my favorite. Oh, it's not about me. It's not about me. They don't want to hear about me. They do. They really do. It's not all about you, but they do want to hear something about you.
What's the clear sign a founder has botched his own messaging?
I think when they've lost, when they're no longer talking about the things and ideas and the values that inspired them to start the company in the first place.
What's one Obama speechwriting principle that every CEO should adopt?
Know what you believe. I asked him once what he thought makes a great public speaker. I thought he was going to talk about some of what we've talked about, narrative arc, all that stuff, storytelling. He said, in his mind, great leaders, great speakers are people who know who they are, know what they believe, and speak from a place of conviction. And so that's what a great speaker does.
Beautiful. As a founder, when does being yourself actually hurt your pitch, right? When does too much authenticity actually become a problem?
Hmm. I don't know. I'm a huge. I mean, sometimes I think the more vulnerable you are, the more honest you are. That's a huge credibility boost. I suppose if you are struggling with something, and the markets and their funders are looking to you for answers, and you don't have them. We've had some pretty famous examples. Once the Treasury Secretary in the Obama administration went out, the markets were looking for some answers on how we were going to deal with the financial crisis. And the money line in the speech was, "We'll have more details next week." And the stock market tanked the moment he said
Well,
that. So if folks are looking for answers, that's the moment for answers. That's a leadership moment. You can't not deliver.
what what excites you most about how AI and human communication can work together instead of in tension or against each other right now?
Sure. Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking about my fears about what it's doing. I share a lot of your concerns that you shared at the beginning about what this is doing, and making everybody sound the same. I think just the speed with which it helps us do our research and finding those little nuggets that can bring a presentation alive, a story, an anecdote, a fact. Often it takes hours to dig through and find those things. If AI can help us find those little nuggets that we can sprinkle through our presentations and make them beautiful, that excites me. That's one of the ways I use it.
Well, speaking of nuggets, Terry, this conversation has been full of them and a lot of good, actionable tips and thinking for people who are struggling with these problems. The journey is probably never over, right? I mean, you get to certain levels of competence and maybe virtuosity, but there's always room to improve. And really appreciate the organized thinking you've given us to that end.
I appreciate it. No, absolutely. I mean, this is something President Obama has been very candid. I talk about it in the book. Even as president, he was working to get better. And it's something, this is a skill, public speaking, communication, is a skill like anything. You only get better the more you do it.
Well, I remember in the book, and there's so many good vignettes, but yes, when Obama says, listen, you should have seen me I'm glad you didn't see me way back, right? When I really sucked. But
Right. And
you
people
got to
forget,
get,
I just, maybe
sure.
this is a great point to end on is that, folks see someone like Barack Obama or other great speakers and they have a tendency to say things like, oh, what a naturally gifted speaker, which really just sort of basically is you telling yourself, well, I can never be that, or they were always that. Well, chances are they won't. Just like a great athlete, a great singer, a great performer, what you're seeing when you're seeing someone at the top of their game is you're seeing years and decades of hard work to get there. So they've put in the work to get better. They've put in the reps. And, we may never sing like Taylor Swift or give a speech like Barack Obama, but we all can get better. And so that's what I've tried to lay out in the book, ways that all of us can get better.
Really great. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Closed Session Podcast. I really want to thank Terry Szuplat for joining us. If you'd like to contact Terry, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in our show notes or at closedsessionpod.com. You can also visit his company website at Terry Szuplat, spelled SZUPLAT.com. If you haven't subscribed yet and want a regular stream of research and insights in your podcast feed, hit that subscribe button now or follow us on YouTube or wherever else you get your podcasts. That's all for today. Until the next time, keep building, keep cranking.